Hey, it's Adam. Welcome to the Backpack Theory Podcast, where we unpack past experiences to help define a better future. And today we have a familiar guest, no other than TW Shannon, who was on the second season of the Backpack Theory Podcast. And today we are going to be unpacking the 3 C's. TW, if you don't know about him, he's got a golden smile, beautiful suits, always fashionable, and currently he has brought those back into style, is what we've been told. But just to give you some background on TW, he's one of the most distinct voices in Oklahoma politics. He is proudly Chickasaw. He was actually the first African-American and Chickasaw speaker of Oklahoma House of Representatives. He's a national news contributor on CNN, Fox News, senior advisor in the Trump administration, just rolled off a term with the USDA, correct? And now he is running for lieutenant governor of the great state of Oklahoma. TW, welcome back to the podcast.
Wow, you make me sound a lot cooler. Can I take you with me everywhere we go and you give that introduction?
You're going to have to talk to my wife.
I would vote for that.
You're going to have to talk to my wife about this.
Did she write it?
Yeah, you're going to have to talk to her.
Right.
So she has a rental fee that she, sends to people, and you have to negotiate. We only take payment in cryptocurrency, however.
Okay, all right. That's good
So
to know.
WLFI or XRP or Bitcoin, one of those things, you're going to have to transfer those. So.
Okay.
As long as you can work on the policymakers right now, Washington and maybe Oklahoma, to move along cryptocurrency legislation, that would be appreciated.
I love the way who's the politician here? I love the way you just work that into the deal, crypto. Yeah, that's awesome.
Hey, I'm all about progressive movement, especially whenever it comes to the great state of Oklahoma.
And that's why they should be sponsoring this podcast.
That's exactly right. You hit it on the head.
So
actually, we take no bribes on this podcast. Everything that we do here is actually free. So I just want to make sure that you know. There is absolutely no bribes that will be taking place. But thank you for that. TW?
Yes, sir.
What's going on?
Man, it is an honor to be back with you, Adam. Honestly, you know how much I admire you, and I know you and your family. You've got a lot of new things on the horizon, but for me to be back in the state after spending the last year serving the greatest president in American history, working in the Trump administration as a senior advisor, I got to wake up every single day and work on implementing the America First agenda. And so it was a thrill of a lifetime, but I'm glad to be back home. We got back in January, announced that we're running for lieutenant governor, and the response has been tremendous. And so we've been crisscrossing the state. We're having a lot of fun and just going out and making our case of how we think we can elevate the culture of low expectations in Oklahoma. That's why I'm running.
I love it. For people that, it's funny, my generation, I'm a millennial, you got some younger generations. Why don't you explain to them? Because I've always kind of been curious about this. The vice president, speaker of the House, you got the whip. Why don't you help us understand the difference of the lieutenant governor versus the governor, and how the lieutenant governor what does that role exactly entail?
Yeah, so one of the things it's not exactly unique to Oklahoma, but different than the federal system. There are other states that do it our way too. But our lieutenant governor runs independent of the governor. So he's duly elected just like the governor is too. We have 10 statewide elected officials in the state of Oklahoma. The lieutenant governor is one of them. The number one job of the lieutenant governor is to be ready to lead day one, should the governor not be able to lead, or if he's out of state for some reason. And I think I've got a unique skill set, having been the senior advisor for the Trump administration this past year, having been the CEO of a bank, and also having been the Speaker of the House. I think I'm uniquely qualified to be the chief marketing officer of our great state, because that's essentially what our lieutenant governor is. He's the chief marketing officer in terms of economic development and telling the state's story about what makes Oklahoma so great. And that's why I got into the race, because I think this state has been incredibly good to me and to my family. I just believe to whom much is given, much is required. So that's why I'm running for lieutenant governor.
It's awesome. Thank you for that explanation. I thought that was very excellently portrayed. I actually have always been curious about it.
A lot of people
I was doing some research for the podcast, and I was like, what exactly does the lieutenant governor do? So as I went in and kind of read through it, you are actually uniquely positioned. I love your rounded background. I think whenever it comes to politics, one of my pet peeves, if you look internationally, this is since politics was created, thousands of years ago, is career politicians, people that just get in politics to get in politics. Maybe they graduated, they went straight into it. They don't have that real world practical experience. Things like running a bank, understanding what that looks like, things like serving in different positions, being an entrepreneur, there's so many facets that you have to offer that, some other politicians, it's easy, I feel like, in the political realm for people to get out of touch with what's
That's right.
actually going on with their constituents. And last time you were on the podcast, we were talking about authenticity. How do you feel like in today's age of running for a political position, is that authenticity paying off for you?
Authenticity is everything because now people have such a high, forgive the phrase, BS meter. I mean, you can't fool the Oklahoma public. You can't fool the American public. Like they have a sense about what's real and what's not. And so, those guys that try to come out and be something that they're not, it just doesn't work anymore. There was a time in history before social media, even before television, where you could run for office, say one thing and go do another, try to be somebody that you're not. It just doesn't work anymore. And I just learned through my, early years in leadership. I was 27 years old when I was first elected to the Oklahoma legislature. And it's very different now being 48 as opposed to 27, how I approach things. I'm a lot more comfortable in my skin. I don't feel like I've got anything to prove. I have a whole lot to earn. I want to earn the respect and the trust of Oklahoma voters, but I don't have anything to prove to anybody. God's been extraordinarily good to me. The state's been extraordinarily good to me. And like I said before, to whom much is given, much is required. And so for me, this is about being your authentic self. But more importantly, I was last night, we were speaking to a group of 300 people here in Oklahoma City. And the urges, the temptation is not to be disingenuous. I don't have any, desire to do that. But I just got to not talk about myself. People really don't care about what's going on in my life. People want to hear about elected officials who want to make a difference in their life. What can they do to help, the conversations around their table to improve their schools, to improve their livelihoods, to extend their paychecks, to make sure that they can go a little further. And I always go back to what I learned when I first ran for office. When I first ran for office, Adam, the people told me in Lawton, Oklahoma, when I was 27 years old, knocking doors. They said three things. They said, "Fix our roads, fix our schools, and leave us alone."
Hmm.
And I think that's a great philosophy for anybody who wants to hold office in state government.
That's really, really, really good. Yeah, I think most people it's funny you talk about I'm in business consulting and I do executive coaching and now I do some software development for companies. And the whole concept of that I try to teach most leaders is if you really want to get to know someone, just stop talking. Just listen to what they have to say, and you will become more wildly successful than you could have ever dreamed because people care about what they need to say. And if you don't give people the opportunity to express themselves, just like you said, people want to talk about themselves. They want to be able to express themselves. They want to, which is what democracy was built on,
Yeah.
right?
Conversation reveals character. And that principle you just talked about being a good listener, right? That's not just in business. It's not just in politics. That works in our interpersonal relationships. I mean,
Hmm.
you're a newly married guy. Listening is an important factor of that. And I think all guys, we can do a better job at that. And I think certainly our elected officials, I think about Donald Trump. You think about him, I remember when he first ran for office in 2016, I was supportive of him then. And I remember the language that was used against him. Well, he's a reality TV star. He's a business guy. He didn't know anything about politics. What does he know? But he was talking about the very things that people were talking about around their kitchen tables. He had listened to what the American people were saying. There are a lot of people that said, wait a minute, this guy is not only speaking to me, he's speaking for me. And I
Hmm.
think that's what people are looking for. That goes back to that authenticity point that we talked about last time.
I agree with you. I actually, since you brought up the authenticity part
Yeah.
and you brought up, President Trump, I want to ask you a question,
Yeah.
pretty pointed question. Over the past couple weeks, clearly we have, a war going on. I think most people haven't fully felt the effects. I think we're going to, I study economics, especially world economics. My wife is from Europe, so therefore I pay a little bit more attention to what's going on overseas. So we have what's going on in Iran. And so, recently President Trump he's very authentic. I'll give the dude that much. I
Absolutely.
mean, he's authentic. He's about as authentic as it gets. And here recently he's published some tweets on Truth Social that I think both sides have been a little taken aback by how aggressive those things have been. Whenever it comes to him endorsing you and supporting you, what is your perspective on why he's doing that? And maybe you could shed a little bit of light, being someone that knows him personally and has
Yeah.
worked so closely with him, to what naysayers or people would say about the way that he's handled that.
Well, I trust Donald Trump. I mean, listen, people talk about the personality all the time. They've been talking about his tweets since he came down the escalator. And I will tell you, you don't get the policies without the personality. The
Mm,
personality of Donald Trump, that authenticity is the reason why we have 9 peace agreements that were signed in the Middle East. It's the reason during his first term we had the strongest economy in American history. It's the reason why we got a ceasefire in less than, a 2-week ceasefire shortly after he tweeted out on that issue. And so I trust this president immensely, particularly when it comes to how to bring prosperity and bring peace to a region that has been fighting for a very, very long time. And so this president brings with him a certain amount of authenticity, as you mentioned, but he also brings a certain amount of he means what he says. And
mm.
I think that more than anything to our allies and to our enemies, they know if he says it, he means it. And so this president, I think, has been the most consequential president maybe in American history. And, the way that he has redefined America's standing in the world, but even domestically, what the president has done to redefine the Republican Party, he made the Republican Party the party of the working class person. And that is a winning combination. So I trust the president.
It's a good answer. Yeah, I think whenever it comes to politics today, especially whenever it comes to social media, which we were talking about
Yeah.
right before we started recording, everybody's got a personality. I think everybody builds a personal brand, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of part of the world today,
It is.
and that kind of extends your reach. And I think he's built a personal brand. I don't personally necessarily agree with the tones and the words or the language he always uses. But the one thing that I have noticed, and this is what I keep on telling people whenever it comes to conversation, if the guy says he's going to do something, he typically does
Yeah.
it. You don't have to necessarily, and in my opinion, you're never going to agree with everything someone does. It's not humanly possible. Exactly right. Well, you can't actually believe everything you think, which I think we talked about last time too. But I think that you have to look at someone's actions, someone's repetitive actions. If they say they're going to do something, do they do it, or is it just all talk? And I think that what the American society, I think what the world has gotten frustrated with is you've got a lot of talkers that don't actually take action and they don't back it up. So with that being said, your platform, I believe, are the 3 C's. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the 3 C's and let's talk about follow through?
Well, the last year, one of the reasons the president endorsed me, Adam, and I'm so honored to have President Donald Trump's endorsement in this race, the only candidate who does, is because the last year I had to wake up every single day as a senior advisor of the administration to implement the America First agenda. And while I was there, I started asking myself, we're always talking about making America great again. What made America great to start with? What was it that made us the envy of the world? And I boiled it down to really 3 things. It's the 3 C's. Number 1 is capitalism, the idea that free markets know better than some government bureaucrat about how best to invest money and where money should go. We know capital is a coward. It doesn't flow to a hostile environment. Making sure that you keep your regulatory burden low, that's how you grow an economy. That's how you grow a world. That's what free markets are all about. Number 2 is our Constitution. I mean, the men who wrote our Constitution, they created the most enduring democracy in the history of the world. We obviously are a constitutional republic, but the idea that our rights didn't come from government, that they came from God, that they were inalienable rights that were endowed to us by our creator, that was a novel concept at the time. On no continent in the world had that ever applied. People were either born born into a hierarchy system where they were nobility, or they were born into a system where they were allowed to govern based on their birthright. This was an idea that we were all, and then the third concept that influenced that constitution really is the 3rd C, which is Christianity. That idea that every single person we meet is created in the image of God, and that we are image bearers of God. That's what's made this country great. And as I think about Oklahoma and what's going to make Oklahoma even greater, I think it's getting back to the things that made us great to start with, our 3 C's: capitalism, the Constitution, and Christianity.
Oh, it's a great response. I think it's fantastic. Who came up with that?
I've heard it before. I'd like to take complete credit, but I've said it so much now, I feel like I did. But I'm sure it's been said a number of times for sure. But I get a lot of my commentary. I read so much now that it's hard to keep up. But I do know as I've traveled this great state, and we've been all over the state,
Mm.
crisscrossing it, it's a message that resonates with people from all walks of life.
Well, so with that being said, let's tackle one at a time.
Yeah.
So let's first talk about capitalism.
Yeah.
I love, it's funny. I tell people a lot of times whenever it comes to politics, I am a conservative whenever it comes to fiscal policy. I'm a little bit more liberal whenever it comes to social issues, depending on how far down that. I don't go too far
Yeah.
on the social issues. But, being an entrepreneur, being a guy that, I've never been handed a dime in my entire life. I've started multiple companies. I've helped multiple companies. I work with multiple, either large businesses or small businesses. So I'm strong whenever it comes to capitalism. I think you got to keep that alive. Whenever it comes to Oklahoma, one of our main areas, one of our main economic drivers are family farms. And if you look at that, which is one of the things that you've talked about, I think whenever it comes to this race, family farm succession, and this goes directly with capitalism, has dropped from 75 to 80% to about 20% in a generation. How do you keep one of our main economic drivers, right? That brings, really true American capitalism. There's nothing more capitalistic than the farm. How do you keep that in Oklahoma? What do you do to incentivize?
So again, this is where having a broad, spectrum of experience, I think, adds value to being the next lieutenant governor. Having spent the last year serving in the Trump administration as the senior advisor on rural prosperity, we thought about this question a lot. In communities like Chickasha, like, Warika, places like, Guyman, America, or you're talking about Atoka, what's needed in those communities that will actually keep farmers farming. And,
Mm.
it's always farmers first, but it's not farmers only when we talk about rural prosperity, right? Because farmers also like to have access to affordable health care. They want access to quality health care. To they want access to, schools that actually perform better or make the students competitive globally. It's a holistic approach about workforce. What do we do in terms of making sure that the next generation of farmers and their wives and their spouses, that they have the opportunities that exist in urban America too? That's how you do it. You keep it strong. Things like infrastructure. As I mentioned before, when people say fix our roads, fix our schools, leave us alone, that applies in farming communities as well. And so Oklahoma has really three core competencies that I like to talk about, maybe even four, one that's recently newly developed. Farming and ranching is one. We've done it as well or better than anybody in the world. We
In the
created some
world.
in the world. Yeah, we've done it, created technologies here that are envied around the world. I took a trip to Israel a few years ago, and they were learning about the farming opportunities and technologies that existed right here in Oklahoma.
Well,
Core competency of Oklahoma is oil and gas, drilling for oil and gas. Like we do that as well or better than anybody. We've had some amazing wildcatters stories. We were, the oil capital of the world at one point. We're probably the natural gas capital of the world right
mm,
now.
yeah,
And
I was gonna say right
yeah,
now.
yeah, and we do it, better everybody. And then the third is aerospace. Aerospace has always been part of our history. And then the fourth is tribal enterprises. We've got amazing tribal enterprises, that would envy Fortune 500 companies anywhere around the globe. And so
Mm.
those are core competencies. Farming and ranching is one of them. The way you keep it, farmers on the farm, being able to pass it to the next generation is keeping your regulatory burden low and making sure that those ancillary services that government core competencies, core government services are in place in rural America too.
Fantastic. I didn't know a lot of that.
Yeah.
Very well stated.
Thank you.
So I got a question.
Yeah, I got an answer. Maybe two.
We're gonna keep it. We're gonna ask a couple more questions in relation to capitalism, then we're gonna go to constitution. If you become the lieutenant governor,
Yeah.
which I believe that you will, how exactly do you directly with the powers that you're going to be given,
Yeah.
right? Like people are voting for you and they're sitting there and they're like, what is this guy actually capable
Yeah.
of doing to help in those areas that you just talked
Yeah.
about?
So as I mentioned before, as the number two guy in the state, you're really the chief marketing officer. And, I'm against, I believe in less government, low taxes. That's why I'm a conservative. And for me, we don't need more taxes in Oklahoma. We need more taxpayers. And so the way that you attract, going back to the capitalism model, is, capital is a coward. I said it earlier. It's not going to flow to a hostile environment. We need to keep our regulatory burden low. God's blessed Oklahoma with every natural resource known to mankind. Like, we've got plenty of water, we've got oil and gas, we've got all types of beautiful tourist destinations. Oklahoma has so much to offer. We just have to address what has been our biggest challenge historically, which is generational poverty. And if you care about poverty, then you should be a capitalist, because it's the only system in the world that's ever moved people from generational poverty into the middle class. More than 2 billion people in the last century moved from generational poverty around the globe into the middle class because of the spread of capitalism. And so, what does that mean? That means that as the next lieutenant governor, we got to be laser focused on economic development and growing Oklahoma's economy by keeping our tax burden low and keeping our opportunities great.
Excellent points. And I think flowing directly into one of the questions that I wanted to talk to you
Yeah.
about is education.
Yeah.
Because and I've heard so many sides of the argument. I am an interesting character. I was raised homeschooled all the way to my junior year in high school. Then I went to Oklahoma Christian High School,
Yeah.
graduated there, went to a semester of college, dropped out. And now, after years of multiple different jobs, multiple different opportunities, I now teach businesses on multiple different levels on how exactly to run a structured organization. And it's very interesting, especially when I'm talking to younger entrepreneurs. And you go to very basic comprehension stuff, like whenever it comes to budgeting, how to start an LLC, what that means, what the tax benefits are. I'll talk to guys that have been in business for years and they're still an LLC. They don't even know about what an S corp is.
Yeah.
Or you talk to people about AI integration, especially whenever it comes to our state. There's some people. I mean, I was looking at the statistics that say that we're ranked 50. It's hard to say that we're ranked 50th or even lower than that when it comes to public education. But then you got other people that are talking about, well, we've also got a bunch of people that are private educated. Well, we got a bunch of people that are homeschooled, so it's kind of a skewed number. Like, how do you go to education, right? Which in my opinion, you want to bring entrepreneurship, you want to bring people out, you have to educate them. How do we fix it?
Yeah. So a couple of things. First of all, my dad was a teacher, and I've seen, the educational model up front. I'm a parent of two kids. One is still in high school. One is a junior at the University of Oklahoma. And whether I've been in the private sector as the CEO of a bank, or when I was working for two members of Congress, or working for this administration under Donald Trump's leadership in the White House, I have learned, and I learned this especially when I was working as Speaker of the House at the Capitol. There are only two kinds of students, Adam. You've got students that have support at home and students who don't, right? You show me a
Mm.
kid who's got a mother and a father, or one parent at least, who's making sure homework gets done. I don't care the zip code. I don't care the race of the kid. I don't care about the building. That kid's probably going to be all right. You show me a kid who doesn't, statistically, it's probably not looking real good for that kid, from an educational standpoint, achievement. Now, exceptions on both sides. There are always exceptions to any rule, but that's still the rule. And I think that's the challenge we have in education, is we have a 19th century model that presumes every kid had what I had at home. I hit the parent lottery. I had two parents who made me believe I was the most important thing in their life every single day of my life. My dad was a teacher. My mom was a social worker. Both were college educated. So education was always a
Mhm.
big part of our upbringing. So, having said that, what are things that we can do to address it? Well, number one, our literacy rates in Oklahoma are atrocious. And when I was in the legislature, we passed legislation to make sure that at third grade, we know that kids up to third grade, kids learn to read. From kindergarten to third grade, you spend all of your time learning to read. From third grade on, you read to learn. So if you get to third grade and you can't read, you got major problems. And we got way too many eighth graders that can't even read at, a functioning level right now. So we got to go back to the things, and we can look at other states. Mississippi, a lot of people are talking about the Mississippi miracle. At the same year that we passed that requirement, that third grade, you can't go on, you can't be socially promoted if you can't read at third grade level. Mississippi passed the same law. At the time, they were 50th in education. We were number 48th. Oklahoma, since I left the legislature, they watered it down. They basically repealed that law. Mississippi didn't. Mississippi now moved from 50th to now number 11th in education. It's about making sure kids can read, because if kids can't read, you're creating a pipeline to prison. We know this statistically. And so we got to make sure our kids are reading again. It takes resources to do it. Throwing money is not going to fix the problem. We've got to elevate our expectations on our kids. I'm a parent. The more you expect of kids, the more they achieve.
It's great. It's funny you say that, because the nuclear family is something I could do. I could do an entire
100%.
podcast on the nuclear
You-
past. I don't want to go. I will at some point. I've got an upcoming podcast at the local VC firm here in
You're
Oklahoma.
creating a nuclear pact.
Yeah, I'm literally doing it right
Congress,
now.
yeah.
But I've got a podcast coming up, and
Well, not literally right now.
yeah, I mean, it's on the way. Yeah,
Point.
yeah, it's on the way. But, I've got a podcast coming up. It's going to be a roundtable discussion with a local venture capital firm here in Oklahoma that really is eager about promoting, local business. And one of the big things we're talking about is agriculture. Another thing we're talking about is classrooms. And we're going to do a podcast where we have, 22-year-old recent graduate that came from Texas to Oklahoma and experienced the Texas education system from public education. And then we're going to have, a millennial that basically is an investor now, has grown a fund, and is really looking at, and he's kind of the one that spearheads that fund. And they're going and actually looking at agriculture and how to invest in upcoming leaders and innovative entrepreneurs in Oklahoma. And then we have Gen Xer and Boomer. And, one of the big things that we were talking about as we're preparing for this roundtable podcast is what could be a great equalizer whenever it comes to education, because not everybody's going to have a nuclear family. If you look at divorce rates, awful. If you look at, I was lucky enough to where my parents were together all the way until my mom passed away, their entire life. So I got to see that. That's not an immediate fix. I think you can start working on that, but that's a whole other generational problem that we're going to have to address. Immediately right now, if you look at younger kids, I think the great equalizer, and we can take this and then go into your second C on this subject, is artificial intelligence. I am someone that is not college educated. I am a bootstrap, get after it. If you find something, you tug on it, and you research and you research and you research and you research. Artificial intelligence is very, very interesting, and it is the hot subject. Everybody in business wants to talk about the new tool. Everybody wants to have partnership with it. Everybody wants to understand it. And as I've dug into it and spent over 1,000 hours over the last few months just dumping all my time and effort into understanding it, I really think that whenever you look at the subject of education, if states, especially smaller states like Oklahoma that's behind so far, can really get on the front edge of how to utilize AI for education and how to really equip kids with that as a tool, educate them on it as a tool, we now have more information at our fingertips than any library in the world. And you can literally do it for $20 a month, if not less. Let me ask you this in relation to that. How do you feel like Oklahoma could start getting a little bit more innovative on cutting edge technologies like AI and integrating that into classrooms?
Yeah. So it's funny you mentioned that, because I've kind of seen this evolution with my kids, one being in high school now, one being in college. Before it was absolutely no AI. We can't, absolutely not. It's, it was almost a criminal offense. And now it's evolved, like it's here. It's like saying, don't use the internet. Like you can't not use the internet. So I think the evolution has been slow, and you're right. We've got to get out ahead of it, because it is here and it's not going anywhere. And so we should be implementing those into the classroom to make it a more individualized approach. Because the challenge you have now with the 19th century model of education, what we've always done, you take a teacher that's got, 20 to 30 kids in a class, teachers invariably, because of the time constraints, and now we put more bureaucracy on them, they're doing more paperwork. The teachers are left with, they have to teach to the middle of the class. And so if you're an advanced student, you're kind of left out on your own. If you get finished with all your work ahead of the time, you got to sit there and twiddle your thumbs. If you're a student that requires a little more attention, the teacher doesn't have enough time to devote to you. So that student has a propensity to get left behind and stay behind and not get the individualized attention that we have. What technology, AI being a part of that, can now do is we can now work to the student and individualize more that
Mhm.
student needs in real time, sitting next to another student, which aids the teacher. So that's just one example of how I think AI can more individualize the curriculum for the student, right? Because that piece of it, and again, I go back, I try to see things through a spiritual
Right.
lens. God doesn't see us as a whole. He doesn't see us as a race or as a nationality. He sees us as an individual. And when we see people as individuals, that goes to business, that goes to parenting. People want to be seen as an individual, not as a monolith or as a group. And when you do, you get better results.
And that's beautiful, beautiful bridge into the second C, which
Yeah,
is the Constitution.
absolutely.
You know, I think AI is fantastic. I think it's great. I think it's one of it will go down the more that I research it over the next 10 years. People do not understand, like, and I am like an evangelist, and I'm like, you do not understand how this is going to impact your daily
Mhm.
life. And if you don't get on board and you don't research it right now, like, you are going to get left behind. I think cryptocurrency and blockchain are the next evolution of that, but we don't have enough time to get into that today. But specifically on the AI topic, what is very interesting, the Constitution talks about what freedom of speech, talks about, your individual rights, right? These large AI corporations, right? These really large companies, and there's only a couple of them. One of the things that they're starting to run into are things like deepfakes. They're starting to run into people creating fake images, people promoting fake information, people taking things that people said and turning it into something that's not true. Based off of the Constitution, right? And based off of what our rights are, how do you feel like AI and the Constitution either complement or contradict each other?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know that I've thought about it before, but I will say this: the founders of our country, when they penned our Constitution, you know, I think they were divinely inspired. I really do. I think they were divinely inspired. I don't believe our Constitution is necessarily a divine document. I'm not saying that, but it's the most impressive document when it relates to protecting the freedom and rights of individuals. That was a novel concept that had never been written before. In fact, but there have been constitutions written before, but they are always written to protect the rights of governments and government officials and to explain and
Mm,
give to the people what their rights were based on that document. This document went a complete different route and said, no, you already have rights. You already have rights based on your humanity because you are created in the image of God. You have certain inalienable rights. We're just going to protect you. We're going to keep these rights protected from the government, which is what our Bill of Rights was about. It's about your rights being protected from the government, the very people that are called to enforce it. And so, as it relates directly to AI, you don't lose those rights because you're in a digital world. You don't lose those inalienable rights that were endowed to you by your creator because we now are in a digital world. Those rights are still being protected, and that makes it still relevant. And so, obviously, the court will sort some of that out. I was listening to an online blogger last night. She was defending herself on X because she felt like Grok had wrongly identified a situation with her and has perpetuated it. And she's saying that she has a constitutional violation based on AI. Of course, the courts
mhm,
haven't dealt with it directly
mhm,
yet, but they will. But my instinct is, our courts, particularly a Donald Trump appointed court
mm.
of conservatives, I think they're going to err on the side of the individual as they should.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah.
And I think this is a subject I don't think I have not heard this conversation because I think it's so new and like like you hit that curve, and once you hit that bell curve on technology and
Yeah.
it just starts taking off, it's really hard to rein it in. And so
Well,
Yeah.
it's not directly related, but it reminds me of, Clarence Thomas, who is a hero of mine, a favorite. I remember him in an opinion not too long ago about social media. Justice Thomas was making the point that it may be time to add some more regulation on social media because it is now the meeting place, if you will, of ideas, and maybe like a utility there should be some regulation, which is an interesting idea. I don't know how I feel about it directly, but certainly it is the marketplace of ideas now, and maybe there is a place
Mm.
to ensure that there are some protections there for sure.
Because as I'm thinking about this and as we're talking about it, and this is kind of one of those areas. It's funny, you prepare for a podcast, you don't really know where it's going, and then all of a sudden you get there and you're like, oh wait, that's very interesting, and I've never
Hmm.
heard anybody talk about that. And I'm kind of having one of those moments right now because you have to have constitutional legislation, right? But how do you do that without constricting technologies from being progressive? Like,
Hmm.
because that's always the battle, isn't it? It's like, well, I want to be progressive, but at the same time, I want to make sure that it doesn't conflict with what we were built on, which is your 3C concept.
Hmm.
So with these new emerging technologies, with being how do you balance that? Like what is your balancing factor to where you determine like what is truth? Like what do you go with?
Yeah. Well, I think I mean, I'm gonna take it maybe a little higher on the question to look at it. I mean, when I was approaching legislation, when I was Speaker of the House, or even as a young legislator, I was asked the question, okay, what's the problem? Does this solution that's been presented, does it actually fix the problem? And
Mm-hmm.
then third, is this the proper role of government? Right, you gotta go a step further. There are some on the left that think government is the answer to every single problem and that government has all the solutions. I tend to agree with Ronald Reagan, who said, "No, government is the problem." And so often, a lot of the problems in our lives are created by government. But when it comes to protecting individual rights, that's what government is for. That's why government
Mm-hmm.
exists. And so if there is a balance of determining, are we protecting rights? Are we treading on rights? I'm going to err on protecting the rights of individuals because that's where our founding fathers erred, and that has served us well in this country for over almost 250 years as we come up on our 250-year anniversary.
Wild,
Yeah,
dude, that we've been around that
it's
long.
amazing.
I'm not going to get into fiscal policy too much. I would love to run down that road, but we're going to have a sidebar about fiscal policy
Yeah,
at some point, especially whenever it comes to debt. But I do want to ask this question because this is directly aligned with what we just talked about. And then we can close out Constitution and go to your third C, limited government,
yeah.
right? I mean, I think that it's such an interesting balance effect. I was looking at the national debt the other day, and I research cryptocurrency a lot. I'm invested in cryptocurrency, and I've been watching the national debt. I read Ray Dalio. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He was, one of the hedge funds that in 2008 kind of avoided that crisis, and him and a bunch of other guys, Robert Kiyosaki, all these financial guys right now are talking about this upcoming collapse or potential collapse whenever it comes to the American dollar because we've printed so much money, right? And then one of the concepts is, well, if it busts, like what do? Go to universal basic income. If there's mass layoffs, do you go to universal basic income? So I think that's where when I'm looking at fiscal policy and the Constitution, we're really kind of on this precipice of like what direction are we going to go, right? And I promise I'm coming to a question. So whenever it comes to having big government, right, whenever you have these impending things, right, you have you got a debt crisis, you're trying to cut it down, and then you have AI, and AI is replacing a bunch of jobs. Where is the line where it's the government's job to come in and control it and basically fix the problem, and where is that line where you basically just let it work itself out?
Ask the question again. Where's the line to fix what?
When it comes to this impending, we got a debt crisis,
Mm.
right? And we got massive inequality. You have a bunch of jobs that are getting laid off, right? And these people are going to be out of a job. At that point, where does the government step in to fix all of those problems? You have millions of lost jobs, right? Where does the government step in and fix it? How does it fix it? And how does it regulate it? Or is that something that you just let the system work itself?
The best thing the government can do is get out the way. Whenever government tries to create a program to fix a problem, there's always some ancillary, symptom that
Interesting.
exists, and then you got to create more government to fix it, and then it's just this ongoing cycle of government fixing it. Now sometimes it can be painful, but the reality is the greater the freedom, the greater the wealth and prosperity. And so if you want to see prosperity grow in a country or in a state or in a local economy, the best thing you can do is get government out of the way and reduce the size of government. And Donald Trump has done that. We saw for the first time the number of federal employees actually reduced as a result of Doge. I mean, what he did in terms of Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, finding where there's waste, fraud, and abuse in the system is incredible. Look at what's happened in Minnesota with the Somali fraud issue. I mean,
It's
billions of
wild.
dollars. Billions,
It's
billions, not millions, hundreds
wings.
of thousands,
And that's just there.
and that's just there. And
Yeah.
they say California is worse. I mean, you look at these liberal cities, the way that dollars have been wasted over generations, the way that they've completely created an infrastructure of taxation and regulation that has been completely hostile to business. And in this global economy that we live in, where people have choices, where industry has choices, they can move to a lot of other places and ship goods in, and that's why I appreciate President Trump on bringing even fairness when it comes to tariff and trade. We've got to get back to a level playing field, and we've got to get back to creating and making things right here in America. That's the best thing the government can do, is to incentivize things be made in America right in the United States so that we're not so dependent on our enemies.
I completely agree. I mean, I think you're going to see less and less globalization, more regionalization. I mean, I have a sneaking suspicion that whenever it comes to what we're doing in North and South America and that whole
Yeah,
area is very strategic. And I think it's very wise, especially, my wife's from Europe. So we go back and travel and, we get to see a completely different world going over there than most Americans get to see here.
sure.
And I think that whenever it comes to supply chain stuff, really building strong partnerships with the whole America region is very, very important,
Hmm.
especially bringing manufacturing
It
back.
is.
I mean, it's of utmost importance. So I can understand the strategy behind going down to Venezuela and going into Mexico and trying to clean that up because as regionalization increases, in my opinion, I think it's going to be very, very important to have partners that are very, very close that don't have an ocean between you that you can actually do manufacturing in. And I think that's a really big deal whenever it comes to the capital
Yeah,
sector.
yeah, but what needs to manufacture needs to be here in the United States. We've got to do it on our own. We think about, natural resources. There's a company here that I've worked with in Oklahoma that actually does a lot of manufacturing of raw materials and goods. And, it's because so much of it, refinery is done in China. And so
Mhm.
even if you get the natural resources from places like Africa or you mine it here, so much of the refining is done in China. That's a problem when we're
Yeah.
talking about manganese or cobalt and other, natural resources that are real critical minerals. Even if you don't, if they're not, even if they're not mined here, even if they're mined in places of the world, if you're not refining them here, you're still dependent on China in so many ways, and that is a matter of national security.
Yeah, that very well said, and I completely agree with you.
Yeah,
That's also why I think regionalization and partnering with
yeah,
like Venezuela, right? Like they've
yeah,
got a ton of natural resources.
absolutely.
And if you refine them, I mean, you definitely don't want to bring them all the way over to China to refine those,
That's right.
right? Like
That's right.
you can refine them here and then you can do the production here and the export from the United States. And that's the way that it should be.
And Donald Trump has been laser focused on that. We've
Mhm.
had presidents talking about it for a couple of generations now. He's the first one that's actually moved on it.
Action is what matters.
It is.
So if you're looking at Oklahoma before we get into the last C, and there's one lever you could pull on right now in relation to it could be the first two C's. It could be capitalism or constitution. You get into office, what's the first lever you're going to pull on?
For me, again, it's growing our number of taxpayers. We need more taxpayers here in Oklahoma. And so we've got to do the things that attract people to Oklahoma. We've got a great story to tell. Our cost of living is low. We've got tremendous natural resources, an abundance of natural resources. Oklahoma City and Tulsa are two main urban areas, have grown exponentially, but we've got to do some work in rural America, making sure that those opportunities exist in rural America too.
Very well stated. Last subject,
Yeah.
last two. We've gone through the first two. Some constitution. Let's talk about Christianity and
Yeah.
faith.
Well, we know Christianity's been under attack for a long time, Adam. It has been since, Jesus left his church here. And he only left us with there are only two institutions that Jesus left and instituted before he left. He instituted the church and he instituted the family. And both have been under attack ever since. But that attack has ramped up in tremendous ways. You think about, just go back to COVID. I'm old enough. In 2020, I remember when all these mayors got together and decided they were going to decide, who was a critical worker, who was, I think it was a critical worker that they referred to as a
Mhm.
mandatory worker. And really they came up with these policies that said, well, you can't gather for more than 20 people at one time. Remember that? And
I remember very,
and
very
and
well.
there are
Yeah.
only 2 models. There are only
Yeah.
2 models that rely on people gathering, right? I can go get pizza. I can go do a lot of you can still go bank without, but the only 2 models that require people to gather in order to exist, 2 business models. One is nightclubs and the other one is the church. And immediately they did an exception for nightclubs and said you had to close at midnight because I guess COVID, was dormant until midnight.
Yeah, it just
But
went.
but it devastated. It was a direct attack on the church,
Mm.
and churches, and many churches still haven't recovered. If we're honest with it, you still go to churches. Church membership participation is down in a lot of areas, some 20-30% since COVID, and so. The church has been under attack for a really long time. We see it in the rhetoric. We see it in the hostile media, the way that the church likes to attack, and Hollywood make fun of the church, and how media likes to report on what's happening in the church. And so the critical component of the third C of Christianity, the idea that every single person that we meet was created in the image of God, that revolutionized the world. And that's what's made America the envy of the world, was those Judeo-Christian values, treating people the way we want to be treated, the golden rule, and recognizing that whether it's the president of the United States, the king of England, or the homeless person on the street, they are image bearers of God, and you should treat them that way.
I love it. I was raised in the church,
Yeah.
Southern Baptist growing up, homeschool kid. Now,
Where did you grow up?
grew up here in Oklahoma.
In
I mean,
where about
well,
where in Oklahoma?
Virginia originally,
Yeah.
but I moved here when I was 8, so I'm an Okie.
Where in
I've got the
Oklahoma?
accent sometimes. So whenever we originally moved here, we actually moved with a homeschool group downtown Oklahoma City. So we lived there. Then we moved out to Mustang, and I
Let
was
me tell you,
homeschooled.
is that too much background?
No, we're fine. Then we moved out to Mustang. Lived out there on 20 acres for a while. That was actually my first job. Got a fence in 20 acres. That was the other thing my dad did. That made me work. I've always worked,
Yeah.
dude. Always worked. Always had to work with my
Work
hands.
ethic matters.
Period in the story. And so I actually grew up, doing that. But we grew up in Mustang, and then we moved from Mustang to Quail Creek, and then that's where I ended up graduating and went to Oklahoma Christian High School. So
Sweet.
I was kind of all over the place. Never got into the public school system.
But the
Where-
metro.
But the metro area,
Yeah.
yeah. Wasn't ever in rural areas. I mean, we lived out on 20 acres, kind of on the outskirts
Yeah.
of Mustang, but not significantly. But growing up, and this is an interesting topic, and this goes back to the AI, the how do you bring money into Oklahoma, like all of it, right? That you circled around. You're like, how do we advance? I love the church, big fan of the church. The thing I'm not a fan of is legalism, and I'm not a fan of stringent old school mentalities that basically don't accept or adapt to new circumstances. And so one of the big things that I think my generation, younger generations that have come after me are kind of seeing, but you're seeing this revival to where they're starting to go back to church. They're starting to really want to plug back into church. Are these very legalistic right wrong attitudes, this very judgmental spirit, if you will, which I don't believe is biblical. And I think Oklahoma has, and it's starting to kind of loosen a little, some of those legalistic values, very deep rooted legalistic values. How do you, whenever it comes to some of these older mentalities, how do you help those people kind of release some of that control and allow the younger people to kind of come in and actually grow and become a little bit more progressive?
You think about the children of Israel when they're about to cross over the River Jordan, and there were, so many who, Moses said, they're not going to come with us. Like we're not taking anybody over the age of 19. Like if you're over the age of 19, you're not coming. So what do you do with those folks? Like they're still around, but they're not going to cross into the promised land. What are we going to do? You hold their hand. You hold their hand and you hold their hand until they get there, until they see it.
Mm.
I think you're right. There is some adaptability in the church. Now, I do think there are some values. There are some values of the old church. And I think about the church that I grew up in, a predominantly African American Baptist church. But those values are universal that they taught me. In fact, my conservative values, I didn't learn them from Fox News. I didn't learn them from Newsmax. I learned them from my traditional African American church, a place that was filled with men and women who love God, love their family, and love their country. That's the world that I grew up in. And so when I think about, for me personally, my faith walk, I try not to be judgmental. I'm not perfect at it. What I've just said this is Jesus was very specific that, you're gonna have wheat, you're gonna have tares, you're gonna
Mm.
have, goats and you're gonna have sheep. You're gonna have, these entities growing up right alongside each other. And he also told us you won't know the difference. He said you won't even be able to tell the difference. So what I've
Mm.
decided I'm gonna do in my faith walk is I'm gonna leave the sorting out to him and just try to love everybody, and then I don't have to try to do the sorting of sorts. He's much better qualified at sorting who's a true believer, who's not. All I can do is base on fruit. I can be a fruit inspector. I can inspect fruit, but as far as judging people, I take them on a profession of their faith and try to find a way to love them. That's what I strive to do. I'm not perfect at it.
None of us will ever be
Yeah.
perfect. This is a great answer. You've been on, it's interesting. Every time I turn on the news or whatever, you seem to be popping up somewhere. And the interesting thing about you, I'm kind of a chameleon. Like I'll blend in wherever because the Holy Spirit just puts me where it needs me to go. But you look at like Fox News and you
Yeah.
look at CNN, you look at News Nation, and it just keeps on populating. Like, do the people at Fox and CNN, what do they get wrong about each other?
I don't know that what they get wrong about each other. I think they actually have a lot more in common. The thing that
That's
drives,
what I'm talking about.
yeah, yeah,
Like what is the thing? Maybe that wasn't a good
I,
question.
I think what drives people nuts about news media now, number one, there's just so much of it. We're just
Oh my
consuming it.
God, it's constant.
It's 24-hour news cycle, right? And so, yeah, and that stuff can be. As a guy who I actually hosted my own show on Newsmax, I was the weekend host for Wake Up America Weekend. And the thing about news that people don't always appreciate, the job of the news is to report on the house that's on fire. The neighborhood that's not isn't really news. And so while it looks like there's always a house on fire, they didn't report on you that, there's not like, look at what's happening at the state capitol. We're right down the street from the state capitol here. Probably 95% of the legislation that goes through flies through with both parties voting for it and probably 90% of legislators supporting it.
Mm.
That doesn't make the news. The 5% where we're, starkly divided, where we've got
Mhm.
major worldview differences, the news reports on that because that's reportable news. And so I think that's probably the biggest misconception about the news cycle is, you know, everyday occurrences of people getting along. That's really not newsworthy. Conflict is what drives sales. And so we're constantly inundated, I think, too much sometimes with that conflict.
If you look at Christianity,
Yeah.
right? Christianity as a whole, like, Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself.
Hmm.
Take the log out of your own eye before you talk about the speck in the other person's eye. And, you running on, these three C's,
Yeah.
especially whenever it comes to that Christianity. How are you going to use those scriptural truths, those biblical truths that you hold so near and dear to you to really bring a uniting to such a polarized world, right?
Well, I think biblical worldview matters. And so I'll say this, I'm a partisan. I don't believe that we've got to just not have differences as relates to public policy. We have a very different worldview. I talk about that Judeo-Christian worldview where there's a whole lot of people that are in this world of politics that don't have that worldview anymore. In fact, there's a whole generation of people that maybe haven't even heard about these
Mm.
values and principles, and they've adopted this secular humanist worldview where there are no absolute truths. The truth is always relative. Adam has his truth, I have my truth, and somehow
Mm.
we just coexist. I think that's a bunch of fiction. I think there are some actual truths in this world, absolute truths
Mm,
that we can recognize. And so I don't mind. I think the way that we bring unity is to speak truth, but try to speak it in love also. I think I don't think it's either or. I don't think we just have to accept non-truth. This idea that, boys should be able, allowed into girls' lockers rooms, or that, men should be able to compete in women's sports. That's
mm.
ridiculous. That's asinine. Or this idea that, young children can choose their gender. That's laughable. I've got a son. My gosh, he's 17 now. But until he was 16, I don't think he could even wash the conditioner out of his hair.
Yeah.
How would we ever trust somebody to choose their own gender? I mean that's absolutely ridiculous for children. So I just say all that to say, if we're going to talk about uniting, and finding things that we agree on in common ground, it starts with speaking truth
Mm,
and being verbal. Because I think those of us that have a biblical worldview, I think for so long we sat back and disengaged from the
mm.
culture war. We allowed the left to completely control the media. They completely controlled our institutions of higher education, and as a result, we got left behind. And I think President Trump did a great job of saying, no, we've got to go engage in the political sphere, in the culture wars. And I think that's how you do it.
Got to go
Speak
engage
truth.
and take action.
Speak truth, but try to speak it in love.
Love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, we covered the three C's.
Yeah.
Now I want you to talk to three people. Okay. So we're going to give you an opportunity to talk to three different people.
Three different people. All right.
The first person I want you to talk to is someone that is in rural Oklahoma, maybe
Yeah.
Lawton, one of the outlying, not major cities, right? Or maybe
Yeah.
even smaller than Lawton, right?
Yeah.
And they are sitting there and they're like, we keep on hearing change is going to happen. Change is going to happen. We're going to stimulate the economy. We're going to bring money to your local rural city. If you were going to talk to that person right now and tell them why, when you get in office, you are actually going to make something happen, what would you say to that person?
Well, I would say to that person, first of all, thank you for what they do every single day. We have got 4 million Oklahomans in this country. And I don't care who you are, if you live in the eastern part of our state or the western part of our state, if you're one of our proud Native American tribal members, or you're someone who just got to this state a year ago and chose to make this your home. You matter. And as a young state, we have an opportunity in rural America to talk about what's best, because I think some of our best values still exist in rural America. We've got rural Oklahomans that have one of the best work ethics in the world. They just need access to the same opportunities as everybody else. And as the next lieutenant governor of Oklahoma, I'm going to make sure that they have that access and that we continue to grow our economies, especially focused in our rural America, rural areas of Oklahoma.
Beautiful. All right. So that's number two. What's one thing that you would tell a 22-year-old just started their life? Maybe they graduated from college, maybe they didn't. They're kind of figuring out the world, trying to
Yeah.
figure out their political view, and they're in Oklahoma and they're thinking about leaving, right? And they're kind of like, well, I don't know if I'm sold on this Oklahoma thing. I want to go experience it. What would you say to that person to get them to stay in Oklahoma in a way that would tell them, okay, this is where I want to be?
Yeah, young people are usually focused on two things. They're focused on a career and they're focused on socializing, finding other people their age. But very shortly, in a very short order of time, that young person you talked about, they're going to start thinking about other things like Ks. They're going to start thinking about investments. They're going to start thinking about growing a family and raising a family. Oklahoma is still a really good option for that. And as you think about where you're going to be in the next 20 years, the next 5 years, being in a state that has a low cost of living and has great natural resources and still has, I think, leaders that have a biblical worldview, I think that's a benefit to you even as a 22-year-old.
Very good. Third person.
Third person.
Third person is someone that has a little bit more of a liberal worldview. They are from another state. Cost of living has gotten brutally high. They are probably either towards the end of their working life or close to it. And they're thinking about relocating to Oklahoma, but they don't know because they're like, I've heard Oklahoma is like there's not much to do. And I've also heard it's super conservative. but it kind of sounds like a good option. If you were speaking to that person and you were going to tell them, hey, here's why you should move to Oklahoma, what would you tell them?
I would say, proof is in the pudding. I mean, you look at these bastions of liberalism in the way that that has been a cancer on so many thriving communities and so many thriving cultures. You look at places like San Francisco and you look at what, Zohran Mamdani has done. I mean, I think New York City has fallen in a lot of ways to radical Islam. Or you'd look at, Seattle or other places like Portland. I mean, these are liberal bastions of overregulated cities where they've almost become unlivable. There's a reason. You think about America. Think about I call it the really the success and prosperity right down middle America, starting at about North Dakota, go south to Texas, and go east over to Florida. That corridor, and Oklahoma's right there in the center, is fueling America. It's fueling innovation. It's fueling prosperity. It's fueling capitalism. That corridor, and one of the reasons is because of our value and celebration of natural resources like oil and gas. That has been a fuel. And so the reason that they can't afford to live where they are is because of the bad policies. And so they're welcome to come. I'd love for them to be here. Just keep their policies and their worldview. And if they can't, keep the registration. That'd be my advice to them.
It's a good answer.
Yeah.
It's a good answer. Well, those are three perspectives. I feel like those are the three perspectives that you really need to speak to in order to take this home. And then in closing, we always got a couple different questions. First question, if someone's watching this podcast and there's a book that they should really read right now, a really, really good book that they should read right now that would help them understand the condition of America or the condition of these three C's you talked about, what would that book be and why should they read it?
I'd probably go my favorite book of all time, and I think this applies. It's not directly related to your question. Is a To Be Loved. It's a autobiography of Berry Gordy, the founder of Motown. What I love about that book is his story of creating this music mega house in the middle of the night in the early 60s, growing these superstars using the ideas of capitalism. Because you think about Detroit, the city of Detroit, Michigan, is really the birthplace of capitalism. If you think about it, the auto industry is what helped. Well, not the birthplace of capitalism, the birthplace of the middle class. The middle class, you could argue, was really birthed right there in the city of Detroit because of the auto industry, and it did, and it superseded race. You had, even in the early 60s, you had these upper middle class black neighborhoods of thriving communities that were examples of capitalism and how it works. These were strong families. They had Christian values, and the ideas of the Constitution were at work even right then. So I think that book is a great microcosm of really short American history that I think still applies today about the concepts and the principles we got to get back to.
Love it.
Yeah, but it's also an amazing story about megastars like Michael Jackson and Diana Ross and Lionel Richie, and like it's just Gladys Knight, some of my favorite music artists too.
Love it. You might have to sing for us here in a minute.
Yeah.
Last, second question would be if there's someone right now in your life that's really impacted you or really is influencing you or, is someone that you really admire, who is that person and why?
Man, I gotta go back to my dad. It's always an easy answer. And I had, like I told you, I hit the parent lottery. My dad, he'll be 80 years old this year. We talk every single night. He's in great health. He's got just my dad is he's the most simplistic kind of approach to everything. Like if it's complicated, it's wrong in his opinion. Like everything is about minimalism and simplicity in his world. And that's helped me so much. But, he's a deacon at a church. He said his goal in life was to die with no vices and owing no one in the world. And he's achieved that long before he was 80 years old. And he's done it by relying on his faith. He's he's a retired teacher. He's got a community around him of people he cares about. He's still serving God in an amazing way. And he gives me a lot of encouragement, still a lot of advice, whether I ask for it or not, because that's what dads do. But I'd probably say my dad. Yeah.
So before we go into the last question, If someone's listening, why don't you tell them about when the voting is, what's coming up, who you're running against? Just give us a little brief summary or update on the race.
Well, listen, I got in this race. I'm the only candidate that's been endorsed by Donald Trump. And the reason the president endorsed me is because he knows I'm a limited government guy who has a biblical worldview. And that's exactly what I want to bring to state government. I did it once when I was Speaker of the House, when we reformed welfare. We were able to bring prosperity by reducing taxes. And we also were able to get rid of woke DEI policies. We're going to have an election on June 16th about who's going to be the next lieutenant governor for the state of Oklahoma. I really believe that, that Western civilization will be on the ballot in November when we go against the Democrat Party. We need a leader who can not only win, but that can help expand what we talked about here, the 3 C's, capitalism, the principles of the Constitution, and certainly Christianity. And that's why I'm running. My website is votetwshannon.com. And if they want to know more about me, I'll be there. I'm on all social media platforms too at TW Shannon.
Love it. Final question. Your elevator pitch.
My elevator pitch.
60 seconds.
60 seconds.
Okay, so I'll let you program that real quick. So you can go into news mode. 60-second clip. Okay. So if you were going to look into the camera, I don't know. We're gonna do this. That was 1. This is 2. All right. And you're going to tell someone that's listening to this why the 3 C's matter to them and how it impacts them directly. What would be your elevator pitch to that person?
The reason the 3 C's work, and the reason they work, is because you can look at the 250-year history of America. The experiment known as America became the envy of the world when we were once just, almost a rebellious cult as seen by the English at one time. We've now turned into a global superpower that is the envy of the world. And we know this because I remember back to the Joe Biden failed pullout of Afghanistan, where we literally had men and women hanging on to the wings of airplanes to try to get here to the United States of America. Listen, there's no other country. You talk about China being a competitor of ours. You talk about Russia being a competitor of ours, and they are competitors in a lot of ways. But the reason we know we have superior values is because neither one of them have an immigration problem, Adam. Nobody's trying to break into Russia. Nobody's trying to break into China, but there are millions of people trying to get here every single day because of the values that we have that were created by the 3 C's, capitalism, the Constitution, and Christianity. They work for 250 years, and I think they're going to work for the next 250 years.
Perfect. I think that was exactly 60 seconds. TW Shannon, always ready, always looking good. By the way, he was the one that tell us about the suit again.
I mean, you asked me before we started about the double breast. Asked me if it was back in. I said, well, I don't know. I'm bringing it back if it's not. It works for me.
Bringing sexy back.
Yeah, I love it. We're trying our best. If you can't do the job, try to look the part.
I get it.
Try to look like you know what you're doing.
Just try to swing, just buy the clubs, and then maybe it'll work out. Hit the occasional home run.
Every now and then.
Well, Tita, thanks for coming on.
Always a pleasure, man.
Yeah, pleasure.
Thank you, buddy.
Well, till next time on the Backpack Theory podcast, thanks for tuning in.